Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ahmed, and today for stepforward.com our task is to understand the data types that are available in PHP. PHP, as we know that PHP is a loosely typed language, which means that the data types we do not need to mention them when declaring a variable, or basically in other words it is that the variables are always in variant type. That is, according to the contents that are provided to that variable, it will change its type automatically, mostly on guess basis. But that doesn't mean that there are no data types in PHP at all. PHP does come with 4 basic scalar types, that are strings, integers, Boolean and floats. To complement further, PHP has 2 compound types, arrays and objects. In this video we won't go into arrays and objects, but we will concentrate on the 4 scalar types that are available. So let's open our site. Open Firefox and move to our website, site1.com. Okay, this is where we left last time, and let's open it up in a text editor of our choice. Okay, now this is the code which we were working on last time. Let's just simply remove all this text. You don't need any of it now. And just make sure that everything is as we wanted it. Refresh it. Yes, it is. So now let's start with the first data type, that is the most basic of it, is integers. Integers, of course, as we all know, that integers are whole numbers that will not contain any decimal part. So to declare an integer, a variable of integer, simply create a num, assign a value to it, 100, and we can of course check it just we did last time. Num echo, and it is 100. Let's zoom a bit, and it is 100, of course. Then what we did was that we variable dumped it to make sure that it is an integer and it is of type 100. Now this was what we had already covered in the previous part. Then we also covered that a variable of different type, for instance a variable of float, yes, this was a float, what we did was that we explicitly changed its type from integer to float. Sorry, it was a float, from float to integer. Another way of doing the same task is reassign it, for instance, but cast it before reassigning. Now if we refresh it, it's giving us the same thing, because this is again this will have the same effect as this one. This was obvious that the integer part, the decimal part will be truncated, but something interesting occurs when we use strings. Now this is not a variable of float type, this is basically a string. We can confirm that by variable dumping it again. And just for confirmation, let's PR it also. Refresh it. Now look, in the first part this is a string of 5 characters, 3, 4, 5, and after that we are converting it into integer and then displaying the result. So it is successfully on guess basis taking this part as the value of an integer and truncating, getting rid of this. There is another interesting part to this, that for instance if I write this string 100 years And now if I refresh it, you can see that integer is still getting 100 out of it, and getting rid of or replacing it with replacing it with nothing, as it is not part of an integer. But what if 100 years I add a string in the start? If I refresh it now it is not at all looking at this 100. So in other words, we can understand it as that the the integer conversion works like this, that it will look for numbers from the beginning. If it can't find numbers, it will simply ignore the remaining part. We can also see that what if we use the first method, refresh it, and of course it has the same effect. Now, another thing is that integers, their length in 32-bit systems is basically 214,748,3647. Basically that's the length of a long in case of C language. And for 64-bit, I'm not sure I will be able to type it correctly. It's a very long string. But for 922337685477587. It's a very, very long string. So let us copy this, paste it over here, refresh it. It is an integer, of course. We don't need this now. And if I add one value to it, refresh it, see, that's the surprising part. Now it is automatically converted to float. But remember that I'm using Ubuntu 32-bit version. When it was within the range of integer, it was showing us an integer value, and when we cross that limit, it has automatically, the overflow will automatically convert its type from integer to float, which can accommodate this huge value. And float has a very, very huge value if we start looking at its boundaries. So basically this was essentially integer data type. Now let's go to the float data type, or let's first of all let's go to the Boolean type. Now Boolean can only be two valued. It can either be true or false. So let's var dump it. Refresh it. It's true. True can also be written as in capital form. It is the same. In fact, this is a better approach in some cases. 1 is also, of course, here it is understanding it as integer, but we can change its type. Set type to Boolean. So it is considering as 1. The other approach used was to cast it, use bool or the complete word Boolean. It's also giving us the same thing. 0 will result in a false, and same is the case that if we use false or we use false, it will give us the same result. Okay. In fact, any non-zero value will always give you a true answer. For instance, 100 will give you a true answer, and 0 false. What about empty string? An empty string will give you a false, but this will give you a true. Similar is the case of other examples, and we will look to it in the coming chapters. Now let's come to the float type. Float, as we already seen, that it can contain decimal path, but there are a few functions that are available to us in floating point numbers. Casting we have already seen, so we won't go into it again. So let me echo and show you. Dot is a concatenation operator. We will look to it again in the string part, but concatenation means combining two strings, or if any of the operands is a string, the resultant is a string. In other languages like C# or like JavaScript, plus is a concatenation operator, but in PHP dot is a concatenation operator, so there is no ambiguity of types. So we have a function named round, and we can give this value over here, refresh it over here, it is 45, giving us 45. It is rounding it completely, but we can also give it a value 1, refresh, it will round it to 1 decimal point. .3. The next function is ceiling. Ceil, and let's see what this will give us. Ceil is basically, it will take this value and will not round it. In fact, it will take it to the upper value, 45.43 or even 45.1. It will always go to 46, whereas rounding it will take it to 45 only. So this is ceiling. Then we have floor. Floor will always take it to the floor will always take it to the lower half, irrespective of the value. For instance, 45.9 will still give you 45. Rounding will round it to 46. Then we have the absolute function. Which is ABS. Of course, in our example, the value is already an absolute, but if the value is negative, we will give a positive value. We will get a positive value. So no need of this again. Then we have the power function. For instance, b times or b square, in other words, will give you this value, b raised to the power 2. Then we have square root, sqrt, this is the answer, and we can of course round this answer to a specific limit of round. Then we have modulus, b mod 3 will give you 0.9, and this is similar to using it like this, 0.9. Of course, it is the answer. It is giving the answer in integer, but anyway. Then we have random, And random can be used in two ways. Simple random function with no limits will give, for instance, getting a very huge answer. Refresh it again, very different answers. But if we need a value between two ranges, for instance, I need a random number between 1 to 100, then it will give me only random numbers within that range. So these are the two ways of using random, and a better approach, a better alternative to random is using MT. A different algorithm is used, random function. So according to the documentation of PHP, this gives a better answer, an improved answer, and it can also be used without the limits. So this was floating number. Now let's get to the string part. Refresh it. Of course, no answer will be returned over here. Just like we did in case of floating point numbers, we will also manipulate a few things. For instance, let's get the length of this string. So it is str length, and we can give it b. Unexpected. What did I do wrong over here? Str length. Let me have yes, I missed that semicolon over here. Refresh it, and it is telling me that the length of this string is 15, and I think we just saw in an earlier video, we also saw this thing. Now before we move on to the further functions, let us understand a few things. That for string we can use double quotes and single quotes. Both will work fine. And for instance, so what's the difference? For instance, I needed to use double quotes within this code for any reason, and let's echo this also. You see, we can see these double quotes over here, and vice versa is the case if we want to use single quotes. It will work over here, but there is a major difference between both of them. For instance, of course it won't work over here, but double quotes will ignore slashes. Of course we cannot this is HTML and we won't get the required result over here, but these escape characters can be used over here. Now single quotes, for single quotes we can the preference is always to use double quotes. As we mentioned earlier, that dot is a concatenation operator that will be used to join two strings. Another difference with this double quotes is that if we have another variable, for instance I have a variable num and it is of 100, I can write over here num is. Now there are multiple approaches how we can use this. For instance, I can num is 100, fresh it, num is 100. Okay, another way is that I can use it over here also, inside of it. It is again telling me 100, and a safe way of doing so is to use these brackets. So variables can be used when using double quote, but this is not the case in single quote. Single quote will give you an explicit literal result, irrespective whether you are using these quotes or not, brackets or not. So that's the reason that double quotes is always preferred. For one reason, variable parsing is possible within a string. For the second reason, that the escape characters will be handled in case of double quotes. Of course, when we are outputting the result in a file or somewhere else other than the web browser, which does not respect those characters. Okay, now we can have a look at a few functions. The length we have already seen. This is the length. So we have another function called word count. str word count. So the length is 10. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Let me remove this now. PHP video tutorials. Refresh it. PHP video tutorials. Length is calculated at 19 and the word count is 3. The word count will not counter for numeric values, just like we observed in the previous one. And this is basically a kind of an array. We can use it like this also, that B. What is the first index of B? It is P. What is the 10th index of B? It is T. This is the 10th index, of course counting from 0. So all strings are also character arrays. In other words, we can say that these are character arrays. Then to extract a variable from, let's copy this function. To get a substring from a string, we have substring and spub sub str. Okay, now the first parameter is the variable, the second is the position, and the third is the count. Come over here, refresh it. Stub string is HP space V. What is this? This is basically this part of the string. I gave over here 1, so it will be skipping this. This is the first. This was the 0 1. The P was 0 at 0. H is at 1. So at 1 it started, and count will be 4. So it is 1 2 3 including the space and 4. This is how substring will work. The other function we will use is another interesting part of substring is, let's comment it again. If I give a value of -1 and refresh it over here, it will start from this portion, from the end. If I give it a value of, for instance, -5, this is where it is starting. This was -1, -2, -3, -4 and -5, and from -5 it is counting 4 characters. I don't think that in real life we will be using any this has any productive use, but something very interesting. Okay, then we have position of a character, str pos, and in string position what we will give is the position of a particular character, and let us give a D. So that is telling us that the position of D is at 6. 0 1 2 3 4 5 6. This is the 6th part where D is located. But if I write capital D over here, it will give me nothing. Nothing is returned. The answer is blank. Although D exists, but this is a case sensitive search. For a case insensitive search, we have to use str position. Refresh it and it is telling me that it is at D. So there are two functions, two variants: str position, strpos, and stripos. The next function we will use is reverse, strrev, and it is quite obvious that what will this function do. Save it, refresh it. This is the exact opposite. PHP, or this is the mirror is the same. Video tutorials. Then of course every language always has this, a lowercase and uppercase. For lowercase, as it is str to lower, everything is lowercase now. And this is to upper. Then there are other functions also, like for instance upper case first letter only. That is upper case first. In our example, it is already, P is already capital, but let us do this, P is small now. So we are getting again capital because of this function. Then something very close to this function is lower case first letter, LC so which you can see that P is small now. Then we have string compare. And basically we have to compare two strings. Refresh it, it is giving me a value of 1, and if I now it will give me a value of -1. Basically what it does is it will compare these two strings, and if the right one is greater than the left one, it will give me an answer of -1. Vice versa, it will give me a value of 1, just like we had in previously. And if, for instance, both are the same, we will get a value of 0. So we can easily use it in a if statement. This comparison will be, however, case sensitive. For case insensitive, we will use str case compare, and a minus value will be given, of course. Okay, now moving forward. Okay, moving forward now, after a comparison of this, we have the trim function. Trim functions, what they do is for instance, I have some spaces after tutorials. Now see, the length is 22. It has increased from 19 after 3 characters. But when I print trim, we don't have extra space over here. Trim has two other variants, that is left trim, only the left part will be trimmed. R trim, only the right part will be trimmed. Right to the right of the string, and trim will trim from the beginning and at the end. Both ways it will be, the value will be trimmed. We have string replace. What to look for instance, I can write over here JavaScript search for PHP, replace it with JavaScript, and where will all this be done? In the B variable. Refresh it, replace something went wrong over here. The replace function will subject. I think I did it. I can't recall right now. Wait a minute. Oh yes, of course. What we are doing is correct, but this is the problem part. We had lowercase it. Refresh it, and yes, it is working out fine. JavaScript. So string replace is a case sensitive replace, and what it will do is that look for this string in this variable, replace it with this part. And there's an optional fourth parameter also, which controls the number of times you want this to be replaced. So string has a number of huge functions. We also have strings that functions that can split one string into arrays. We can use string to find arrays, etc. Strings string basically, as we know, that store ASCII values. So a string, for instance, in our case over here we have a. There is a function called chr. Chr function is used to is supposed to get an ASCII value and return a comment this part and return its alphabet. 65 is the ASCII character for A, and we will get A for it. And the opposite for this is ORD, and it expects the opposite. So this is how we can change from ASCII to character and from character to ASCII. There's a huge list available for string functions. We can you can always have a look at on the internet, and a good reference part is the website php.net itself. So inshallah, in the next video we will move to arrays.